first speaker. We are so excited to have Dr. Erin Watson with us tonight. Dr. Watson is a clinical psychologist and is the current wellness coordinator for San Rafael City Schools. He is the former senior trauma trainer and director of community health for the RISE Center, which is a community-based youth adult partnership organization in Richmond, California, serving adolescents subject to multiple levels of violence exposure. I'm just going to mute. His research has focused on the unique expressions of trauma and healing in adolescents overcoming multi-layered trauma and marginalization. So with that, I'll pass it to Dr. Watson.
Hi, thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. I want to just begin first and foremost by really acknowledging you all for spending time this late in the day being here to learn about adolescence. I think the vast majority of us on this call are no longer adolescents, but once were. But it really is a testament to your commitment and care for the youth in our community and your own children at whatever level you can participate tonight. So I'm genuinely moved by the amount of interest and desire to talk about these subjects and learn how we can best be allies and support for the adolescents in our lives. Or if you are an adolescent, participate in this discussion and reflection on what it's like to be you right now. So with that said, let me share my screen and get started. Everybody can see okay? We're good? All right. So a little bit about myself. I've worked as a clinician, as a therapist, as a coach, like a soccer and volleyball coach, as a community organizer. Currently, I'm helping set up and run a family wellness center at Bahia Vista Elementary School in San Rafael, previously at Davidson Middle School as well. A lot of my professional work has been with adolescents. And as stated earlier, predominantly looking at the unique challenges of violence exposure and trauma on adolescent life and how adolescents navigate that experience. We won't be talking a lot about trauma and violence tonight. I wanted to just offer some reflections on adolescence as a stage of life, and then hopefully have some back and forth with our other guest speaker tonight, Leo, on that topic, then listen to what they have to say. And then afterwards in the questions, we can hone in more specifically on specific topics of concern or interest for you all. So that's how I'm hoping this evening goes. Y para los padres o cuidadores que hablan español, muchísimas gracias por estar acá. Desafortunadamente, por el tiempo que tenemos, no puedo estar hablando en español y inglés los dos, pero sigo en inglés, pero cualquier pregunta que tienes, puedo contestar en español si quiere y me alegro que estén acá. So I wanted to begin this evening and just ask each of you to, if you feel comfortable, kind of close your eyes or sit back for a moment and pick a particular age of your own as an adolescent. So if you can just stop and remember yourself at 12 or 14 or 17 years old, just pick a particular time in your life and just retouch down with that adolescent that you were for a moment. You know, what were the formative experiences going on around you at that time? Who were your key influences? What were your stresses? What were your interests? And what was your environment like at that time? And just kind of hold your younger self for a moment. And when you're ready, if just either just think to yourself, or if you feel like typing into the chat to share, please do. Um, just two questions. One, what would you say is one of the most prevalent feelings you would use to describe that time in your life? And I'd love to take a moment to see what the answers roll in. And or if you would like to put, what do you feel like you needed from adults in your life most of all? And maybe we can all open the chat box and read together as we type as well. See, bothered and confused, overwhelmed, curiosidad, presence, encouragement. Encouragement, I'm assuming, is what we needed. Discomfort, safety, warmth, felt scared, felt lost, listening and acceptance. Yeah, insecure. Adolescence is a reassurance and guidance. Beautiful. Please keep entering in the chat. I'm going to keep talking just because our time is limited. Um, Curious, but it's a very, very powerful time in life that we all go through. And even more than relating to adolescence, thinking about your child or the adolescents in your life now, really this evening, see if you can hold your own self as an adolescent as we talk about that experience, and see what resonates, what doesn't resonate, and see where it might lead us in the discussion as we think about how we can be helpful as adults. So, haha, I wanted to take a quick step back before we talk about adolescence, because it's a stage of development that we go through as Homo sapiens. And so I want to just for a moment think about ourselves from evolutionary perspective as a species. So we know on this planet that all living beings have evolved or developed in relation to the environments that they are in. This is really important. And success for any species is defined by how well they can predict and adapt to an environment. That's an evolutionary perspective. So whatever the animal's or plant strategy is, its success will be determined by how well it can adapt to the environment, predict the environment it's coming into, and succeed therein. So I want to just show a few different animals. One of my favorite animals, sorry to throw this up on your screen so large at home, was a cockroach. I don't know if anyone else's favorite animal is a cockroach, but they are incredible. They haven't evolved for between 50 to 150 million years, meaning their strategy has succeeded this entire time. They're 7 to 11 times more robust against nuclear reactivity than we are. They can survive eating almost anything whatsoever, including licking stamps for years. There's been studies that have shown. And lastly, this is gross, but totally incredible. They can actually survive decapitated for weeks. And the only reason they die is that they can't get food into their system without a head. Otherwise, they would keep living even without heads. So that they are incredible and also particularly indestructible. And I'll come back to that in a second. But other animals too. So, anteaters, of course, their beautiful long tongues to get down ant holes. This is just a gratuitously cute picture of baby porcupines. Their strategy is quite obvious to us all, how they survive in the world. Even sloths, right? Moving incredibly slowly has, as a strategy, worked for them as a species in order to survive. So We as human beings aren't lucky enough to have big, strong claws. We're not that furry. We're very fickle. If you turn up the temperature 5 degrees, we're too hot. Turn it down 10 degrees, we're freezing cold. So how did we, as these relatively hairless, small, fickle creatures, become so incredibly dominant on this planet, just as a species? And really, our success as Homo sapiens is, I would propose, or evolutionarily thinking, is largely down to two things. One, we have an incredible ability to adapt to our environments and learn from them, and learn in real time. Part of this is because our communication capacity is exceptional. We don't require generations to adapt to an environment. Like polar bears are huge, beautiful, much stronger creatures than we are, perfectly adapted to the environment that they have always lived in. As that environment changes, they are dying, and they are struggling to survive as a species, because now their white fur is no longer helping protect them when they're in forested areas, as ice melts. They stand out more, and the techniques they've used to survive are becoming more and more difficult for them. For us, we don't need to wait generations to adapt. We can adapt immediately through communication. We call each other, we talk to each other. Hey, it's cold outside. Hey, there's trouble around the corner. Don't go that way. Go this way tonight. Wear your coat. We have weather systems. We've adapted incredible ways to predict our environment and adapt to it, unlike any other species before. And we also have an incredible ability to work together. This is also due to our language, and not just verbal language, but our ability to read each other. We have incredibly sophisticated systems in our brain for just when meeting someone, being able to interpret and imagine the affect they're having, what their experience might be, and how we might relate to it. All of this has enabled us to be an incredibly successful species. And this is really thanks to our interpersonal neurobiology. What that means is that we have a brain that develops tremendously postpartum, much more so than any other species that we know of. And that development of our brain takes place primarily through our relational experiences with others. So that first begins with those initial people taking care of us when we're a baby, and then expands slowly out into the community and the world. And from what we've learned, our brains continue to develop throughout our lives, absolutely at every single age. With that said, there are two remarkable times of neural development that are kind of explosive in growth. And that is in that very early childhood, up to 5 years old. As many of us have seen who are parents, I mean, the growth week to week, month to month is astronomical at that age. And then the second most powerful time is adolescence, which from a neurological perspective, at least from my last understanding, begins roughly around 11, 12 years old, depending on the person. And goes up to 25-ish. It kind of keeps shifting, but that frame period of time, at least, is an incredible, there's an incredible amount of change, reorganization, and development happening in the brain. And we lean on these experiences. Sorry, getting a little bit lost. What we do during adolescence in particular, which is what we'll get to, is we begin to take all the life experience that we've had in those first 12, 13, 15 years of life, and we begin to consolidate into we begin to consolidate our experience so that we can begin to predict better how people will treat us based on how we've been treated, how we begin to identify ourselves based on how we've been identified, and what we can expect in the world. So it's an incredibly formative time. We take forever to grow up as a species. Horses, right, when they're born, pop out and within minutes can walk and run. Snakes, when they're born, hatch out of the egg and snake off into life being a snake as long as they make it. They don't require instruction. Human beings, we can take up to 25, 35, 65 years to grow up. But our strength in taking that amount of time to grow up is that during that whole time, we are constantly adapting to our environment to be as successful as possible. And of course, that growth and development is sorry, I can't see part of my screen. That's what I'm struggling with here. In any case, it's foundational dependent, meaning that we first begin with our sense of attachment and security in the world based on our experience as we're held by our caregivers and in the world that we're in. From there, we begin to develop our emotional flexibility, expression, regulation, and language. And from that capacity, as someone who feels somewhat secure in knowing where we are and have some fluidity with our emotional world, we begin to develop conceptually our capacity to study history, cultural awareness, politics, math, language, social interaction. And we are continually revisiting these stages as we grow. And particularly under what we know is that trauma, oppression, marginalization, chronic stress really impact our capacity to move fluidly up and back through these layers. And in particular, when we are stressed, most human beings tend to, even as adults, regress back to our base need. When we experience something traumatic or difficult in our lives, what do most people do? They want to call home. They call a loved one. They return home. That's our base. So we do that throughout our lives. And it's really important that we're able to have a home, be able to regulate ourselves emotionally before we can engage in more sophisticated tasks. So why then are teenagers? Why is there this period of life where everything from a certain perspective seems to go haywire? I'm kind of dating my own age here by putting up a picture of Crisscross. For those of you who don't know, they were kind of at the forefront of a trend that my peers and I in Oakland participated in, where we hit middle school and we started wearing our clothes backwards. We wore super baggy jeans backwards, shirts backwards, hats backwards. And I remember, or sagging our pants, piercings, and often when asked sort of like, why are you doing that by adults? We'd mostly just be like, shut up. I think because we basically didn't know why we were doing it. We just thought it was cool and we were trying things. And so that's what I want to get into. What happens to the Homo sapien when we reach this period of life where we see all kinds of different behaviors? So I want to just talk about that a little bit. There's three basic ideas I want to share. And some of this is covered really beautifully by Dan Siegel in a book that many of you may already be familiar with, came out quite a while ago, called Brainstorm. I mean, he has a million books, but that one in particular is really quite useful in reflecting in an empathetic and insightful way about adolescence. But there's three things that I wanted to share, kind of summarized in part in that book. One, adolescence for us as human beings is a crucial time for consolidating experience and identity development. As I was saying earlier, we go through those first 12 years of life absorbing and absorbing the sounds around us, how people treat each other, how they treat us, having formative experiences. And during adolescence, we really begin to summarize all of that experience and say, I've been around long enough that I can begin to predict kind of how I will be treated by others, how the world works around me to help me navigate and move within it. And that's what identity development is in part for, is to give us a sense of shape and identity as we move through the world later as an adult. So in that, because of that, it is absolutely crucial that adolescents are developing their autonomy. They are practicing at that point how to be a being unto themselves, surviving in the world and collaborating with their peers. So self-determination is essential. And this is why so many adolescents are very insistent on going their own way. It's actually an essential life skill for them to be practicing at that time of life. Also, it's a time when they're making sense and meaning of their own life experience up till now. And if we've had a whole host of healthy relationships and experience and how we've been seen, our brains are right at that moment consolidating all that experience neurologically, and helping us go, oh, you know what? I'm a good person. I'm good at these skills. I can take confidence in myself in doing this. Why? Because I've tried it over and over, and lots of people have been telling me that my whole life. Conversely, when we haven't had those experiences, we also begin to embed that into our own sense of self and identity and how we move through the world. Fortunately, that process takes place again from 12 to 25 and ongoing refinements as we go. So it's not a one-time thing, but throughout adolescence, it is the job of teenagers to make meaning of their life, to generate an identity that is coherent to them and makes sense to the world that they've experienced, and to practice their autonomy. Two, also, Leo, please jump in at any point if it strikes your fancy.
Thank you.
Adolescence.
I've
Go ahead.
sorry. I've just been
Yeah.
enjoying the whole thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
Okay. All right.
No
Cool.
comments.
Leo's our official fact checker on whether I'm blowing smoke or not. Okay. Adolescence is also an incredible time of creativity, innovation, and courage. We frequently think about adolescence as kind of having what we call raging hormones that cause them to do all kinds of things. It looks like, it turns out as we learn more about ourselves, that it's not really raging hormones that are an issue. In fact, what adolescents take a lot of risks, right? This is one of the challenges that we want to talk about tonight, is kind of risk taking. But it's not that adolescents neurologically can't determine risk well. It's that they get an extra dose of reward when they try something new that is unlike anything we're experiencing. So maybe there's, two buildings close together, and you think, wow, I can see that that's pretty dangerous to try to jump from one to the other. But if I did it, that would be amazing. So that's kind of what's going on in the brain. It's not that adolescents can't see risk. It's that they get a lot of reward for trying new things. And thank goodness they do. We'll talk about this in a second. But as a community, we all benefit from the courage, creativity, and innovation that adolescents lead. But setting that aside for a second, it is hardwired into adolescence to be courageous. And I think that's something that part of the reason they do that is because it's our way as a species of updating our information. You know, Leo may say, just because you're saying it doesn't make it true. Your information's 15 years old. How do I know that's going to be accurate for the world that I'm in? I'm going to wear my pants backwards. And then, by 14, 15, we're like, this is uncomfortable. I'm going to wear my pants forward. So, 8 times out of 10, the stuff adolescents try, they end up being like, okay, maybe you guys were right as we grow. But for every 8 of those 10 things, there's 1 or 2 things that adolescents discover and explore that, no, this is a better way to do it. And we've just updated the information that we all benefit from as a community. And this is why it's such an incredibly powerful time and also can be such a helpful one. So they're reality testing. Is this information still relevant to the world now, not to the world you grew up in? And 2, there's a constant confrontation between what they've learned and what might be possible. And as we enter an increasingly uncertain world and future, I genuinely believe that our actual lives will depend on all of our capacity, likely led by adolescents, to think creatively about how to survive and move into the world as it's changing. Lastly, and then I'll take a quick pause. Adolescence is this incredible time where we all, going through that period, have to prepare ourselves to work with our peers in shaping and caring for the world. If we are a bunch of 15-year-olds, in 10 to 15 years, we are the adults that are driving the vehicles, running the banks, the organizations, teaching in our schools, leading our political movements, functioning in our militaries. So we need to practice how we are going to engage with each other. What does that look like? I work at an elementary school now. 3rd graders, a kid does something wrong or bad or something. Teacher, so-and-so did such and such. They depend on adults to help them organize their world and stay safe. And they use adults in that way to do it. It's beautiful. Get to Davidson Middle School, 7th grade. Teacher, you're a snitch, right? And we know there's a lot of dangers and harm that takes place within this idea of snitching culture and whatnot. So I want to be careful with that. But from an adolescent perspective, it does make sense that in part what's happening is, hey, you got to work this out with us. No more leaning on the adults so heavily. Of course, they still need to some, but we actually got to work this conflict out. And so we see, in my day and age, pre-texting, all of that, we just talked on the phone, 3-4 hours a night, go home. Everyone like, get off the phone, talk. Adolescents have a capacity to just be together, close the door, don't want you anywhere around, mom or dad, like, I'm talking to my people. That is hardwired, and it's a positive quality that adolescents have. They are practicing how to. I remember spending like months getting up the courage to ask somebody out to go out in 8th grade. And then they said yes. And we dated for 2 weeks. And then we were like, okay, that's enough. And then, tried it with something else. And adults like to think about that as sort of like, that's not love. That's not real. Yes, it is. It is. It's the steps that we are taking to learn how to do that. And they're very important steps to take. Okay.
Dr.
So,
Watson, I just want to give you a quick little time check for 5 more minutes.
wow.
I
Okay.
know, I'm so sorry.
I will get through a third of my slides. So in summary, adolescents, they are integrating experience into testable theories. They need to try on selves to see what feels right given the world they're in and given the experiences that they've had. And they really need support and patience from the adults around them as they navigate this. Um, I think it's important to reflect on, if we think historically through Homo sapien history, adolescents, risk taking have absolutely, adolescents have led virtually every single revolution, social, cultural, political, technological movement of change that we've ever experienced as a species. Adolescents led that. Wars, politics, culture, art, adolescents have been on the front line. And we no longer have a society where when we see a 15-year-old, we think of a leader and an innovator and a precious member of our society that's helping us survive as a species. We think of like, hey, a bunch of 14-year-olds coming over tonight, lock everything up, what's going to happen, they're going to break stuff, et cetera, et cetera. Adolescents have lost an esteemed place in our communities, I believe. And I think that we all thrive when adolescents' unique strengths are embraced and their vulnerabilities are recognized. Risk taking is very risky, and some of the risks adolescents take are dangerous, and they need our help they need parameters within which to be exploring and thriving, so that we have an essential role as adults in the community to support them in this process. I don't want to say it's up to us, just get out the way and stay away. No, we too have a role to play. But I think we tend to not honor the role that adolescents are playing. And then lastly, which we won't get to too much right now, but maybe in the conversation after, trauma, violence, marginalization, being made to feel invisible, seriously disrupts adolescents' capacity to feel confident, courageous in a healthy way, and participate socially with their peers in healthy ways. That's the vulnerability that we really need to be protecting our adolescents from, is really trauma, violence, oppression, so that we can enable them to be thriving.
We can add a couple more minutes if you'd like. I think people would really love to hear a little bit more about trauma and those things. So
okay, I will try to skip to just the most. So, the word trauma is thrown around a lot, especially in the last decade. Gratefully, it's no longer a minor topic, but kind of one we all utilize. But it also carries a lot of different meanings. I led a large research project in Richmond with 500 young people, asking them about their own experiences of violence and trauma, how they experience it, how they survive it. One thing in the trauma research I can say as a psychologist, there's very little research that centers young people's descriptions and experience of trauma themselves. Most of it is generated from adult trauma that then we kind of morph and shift a little to adapt to what younger people are going through, but it's not generated from young people. So we tried to lead a study really generated from young people. And I just want to share a couple, very few things that were highlighted there. These were young people in Richmond exposed to multiple layers of violence. As this young person very poetically and succinctly said, trauma is not always just an action or an experience. It also can feel kind of embedded in the environment that we're living in. So I grew up with violence as if it were a sibling. Ooh, so poignant. Also important to remember that the social, economic, cultural context that we come out of not only shapes how we experience the world, including traumas, but how we express our distress and healing. And this also is uniquely expressed by adolescents differently from adults or younger children. And it's really important for us to remember that. Just very quickly, young people felt talking about violence exposure, used very intense language, felt silent, alone, like nobody, afraid to trust anyone, scarred for life, angry, mad at the world, stopped caring, become numb, hopeless. These are really, really serious feelings, and they're really unique to adolescence in part. Not that we all can't experience that at any age, but because of this period where you're trying to consolidate your sense of self and your sense of future, when you're hit at that age, it has a very, very strong impact. And also because of that, is part of what leads to substance use and abuse and risk taking and not caring or giving an F or engaging in activities that we might think don't make any sense. The four main categories that came up with were there, trapped, angry, scared, hopeless, numb. These are the last two slides I want to cover. One thing that we learned through that study is that distress from trauma exposure was less about how many traumas per se one had go through. Of course, that matters. But what we found was actually a constellation of a few things. How pervasive was violence in their life, in their environment and life? But also, not just that, how powerless did those young people feel? So we had young people who had faced tremendous amounts of violence, but were very connected within their family or their community and had a strong sense of like fighting for justice or other qualities that enabled them to feel more robust in the face of that. And there were other young people who may have not been exposed to as much trauma, but were very alone or felt unwitnessed. And they had higher degrees of stress than the other young people. So it's not just about what you've been through. It's also who's with you as you go through it and how much say do you have in that. So safety, belonging, and self-determination are crucial for all of us, really. I won't even just say adolescents, but they're often missing for adolescents. And so as they discussed what coping strategies they would use, they were extremely insightful about the challenges that adolescents face with each other even. But these three qualities came up. How safe do they feel? How healthy are the relationships in their life? And what kind of availability of resources do they have internally and externally? That tended to direct what types of coping strategies young people were using more than anything else. And I think as we think about substance abuse, I'd really like to highlight and keep in mind these qualities. And I'm just going to stop right there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Watson. I'm so glad we were able to give you more time because I know that everyone wanted to hear more about, not only your research, your work in supporting young people all over the Bay Area, but thank you so, so much. It's the hardest part of my job, cutting people off sometimes. But I know parents will have, and, folks on the call will have tons of questions, and I'm excited for our question and answer and discussion later. So thank you so much again, Dr. Watson. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over, or introduce at least, our next speaker. I'm very excited to present to you all Leo de la Huelga. Leo uses she, they pronouns and is a junior at TAM High School. I know some of the folks on the call are parents at TAM High School. Leo is also an intern with the Elevate Youth California program. I have the pleasure of working with Leo in that capacity. Leo is also a youth board member with Marin Healthy Youth Partnerships, and they are passionate about fighting the fentanyl crisis and developing effective methods of underage substance use prevention and harm reduction. So I'll pass it over to Leo.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for Dr. Watson. That was an amazing presentation. I just wanted to add a little bit. I wanted to emphasize one of your points by giving an example about how much that my peers put in to fighting climate change. A lot of them are volunteering, and I don't know, I wanted to give them some credit because that is just a big crisis that we're having right now. And I feel like my generation is really putting in a lot of work. So kudos. And my presentation is going to be a bit less mature. We're showcasing a project that we're going to work with middle schoolers on to give them a tool set to not depend on substance use when they go into high school or later in their life or even during middle school. So here we are. So this presentation is called Healthy Teen Decisions. Thank you so much for my internship group. They really put in a lot of work on this, and also to Kelsey and Melissa on the MHIP board, and Molly as well. Always thank you to Molly. Sorry, guys. All right, let's see if this works. So I'm going to walk you through a little thing the same way that Erin did. Can you remember the last time that you felt really great, maybe having fun with friends, or totally relaxed and at peace, or you were really excited and pumped up? Just a happy, positive experience that you felt. Hold that and ask yourself, what was the feeling? Seeing if you can name it and just letting that feeling wash over you. What was the heart of that positive experience? Think about the why. What was the reason you felt this way? Was it accomplishment, a feeling of acceptance, a sense of community or independence? Did you overcome a challenge? Oh
Leo,
my
just quick,
goodness.
I'm so sorry. It doesn't seem like it's showing, but maybe if you exit back out, we were able to see it before you presented it. So if that feels comfortable, maybe we can look at it
Oh,
that.
really?
Yeah,
Sorry, guys.
that's
Let
okay.
me see. Oh. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. I'll be right back.
Thank you everybody for your patience. It wouldn't be a let's talk discussion without some technology glitches. So
That is
just like
true.
last time.
And I do, for some reason, this happens when we try to do the slideshow presentation, unless it's downloaded,
I
it
know.
just won't show up. I think it might be a Zoom thing,
It might be.
but it does work in just the preview mode.
And in the meantime, while we're waiting, if any of our attendees, any folks joining us have questions that maybe came up from Dr. Watson's presentation, or like a question you might have for Leo that you're already excited to ask, like please feel free to drop them in the chat. But I see Leo has figured it out.
All right, I guess. Let me see if this works. Molly, just let me know if it stops working.
Looks good.
Okay. So these are the ways that you feel good naturally. We call them natural highs. So maybe you were hanging out with your dog or having some nice independent time, listening to music, eating your favorite food, playing sports with your friends. Going into the science bit a little bit. So this is the chemistry of happiness, just to let you know what the specific chemicals are that make you feel these ways. So if it's your favorite food, that's endorphins. If you are playing with your friends, that's going to be dopamine. Nice calming feelings or serotonin. And the happy feelings like listening to music and getting a hug is oxytocin. So the next step is decide. You have the power to decide to do things that give you that naturally good feeling. In fact, you are already automatically doing this all the time. Remember, feel, decide. This is the little mantra that we're going to be going over during this presentation. So the catch is there are these things called nuggets all around you that are demanding your attention. They make you feel good, but there's a downside. They interrupt your natural ability to feel. So what are some nuggets? Can you think of some things that make you feel good, but aren't very good for you? Maybe you could type them into the chat. Some of my nuggets are probably going on screens too much, not getting a full night's sleep because I want to watch another episode of my favorite TV show, or eating one too many candy bars. So these are some examples. Maybe it's social media use or screens in general. Candy bars, definitely, weakness for many people. And then substance use, such as nicotine, alcohol, cannabis, and many, many others. So let's meet Kiwi. And I can only play the video if I present, so let's cross our fingers.
It looks like it's still loading.
The video is starting.
Yeah, we can't see it. Is there maybe we can send out the link for the video, Leo? In the meantime, do you maybe want to just talk through just generally what they might see in that video? And I can put the video link in the chat for everybody.
So the point of this video is there's this cute little bird that goes along and gets this cute little nugget and gets a really nice high, gets super happy, and then goes to find another one and gets really happy and super amped up, and then goes to find another one and getting really happy, but then getting really sad afterwards. So the happiness and those good emotions don't last as long, they're not long term. And then over and over again, trying to inch towards that next good feeling. And after that, just feeling worse and worse and worse. And I'm sure all of us can relate to giving into things that probably don't make us feel very good in the long term. I wish that I wouldn't stay up and watch that last episode and get a good night's sleep instead, because I'd feel a lot better during that test the next day. So there's lots of exciting products and activities out in the world. Here's an example. Sorry, it's small and we're in this format, but this is an example of, hey Molly, can we still see? All right. This is a mixture of candies and substance use products. So if you can search through, it's pretty difficult to tell some of them apart. If you're presenting this towards middle schoolers, you would get them to pair up or group up and see how many they can tally off for substances versus candy. The point of this being, a lot of brands are being used to market products towards kids. I'd look at these and I could find a lot of these brands in 7-Eleven, in Safeway, and they're really popular, but if you take a close look, you can see the THC symbols, the weed symbols, all of these are substance use products. And this is terrifying because some of these are like my favorite snacks. These products look really exciting and fun. A study of Instagram posts found that 81% of e-cigarette posts featured flavors that would be appealing to youth, such as fruit, candy, and dessert flavors. You can see that in vape flavors. They have root beer, blue raspberry, pineapple, strawberry, weird combinations that are definitely not natural, but are clearly marketing towards children and people who, would want these types of products. So the big problem with this is starting substance use earlier increases your risk of a future substance use disorder. If you start at age 17 or younger, you are more likely to use drugs often, develop a substance use disorder, go back to drugs after stopping for a while, or getting clean. Addiction. So what is addiction? We've been talking about all of these depressing things and all of these like dangerous substances, and apparently middle schoolers and kids in general are at risk for, wanting these things and getting tricked by marketing. Um, but what even is addiction? So going back to Kiwi, addiction is manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure and relief in, therefore craves, suffers negative consequences in the long term, and can't give up. The point being, temporary pleasure and relief. These are not long-term things. This is not like going to the gym and feeling good about yourself and then working towards goals that you have, maybe studying more or deciding to go on a diet or things that are healthy for you. Just any examples that you have. Craving. If we could have seen the video, we could have seen that at the end, Kiwi is just inching towards that last nugget and can't get to it and just falls apart because they're in such a low after all of this addiction that it's just impossible. All of a sudden, they are in this spot where they can't return from. So obviously, negative consequences to all sorts of substances, especially when you start at a younger age. And it's very hard to give up. So what can we learn from Kiwi? This is when we'd ask the middle schoolers, what do you think you can learn from Kiwi? Basically what addiction is and what the experience is like and the cycle of addiction, and just putting it in a more simpler form for them to understand. I watched that when I was in about 8th or 9th grade, and I still remembered it. That's the reason I ended up putting it in this presentation because it really resonated with me. Addiction is also not anyone's fault. It's not Kiwi's fault. It's not anyone's fault at all. So the brain, going back to some positives. So when you grow up, your brain develops and gets stronger, like a muscle. Your brain grows and develops until you are 25 years old, just like Dr. Watson was saying. So right now, as a middle schooler, your brain is working really hard to develop these muscles. Form your own ideas, think abstractly, express yourself, consider other points of view, sense of what feels right and wrong, or good or not so good, peer relationships, and social experiences. So the prefrontal cortex, which is highlighted right here, right behind the forehead, is responsible for skills like planning, prioritizing, and making decisions. Oops. Why does it matter? Because your brain development is focused on relationships and social experiences, and because your prefrontal cortex, decision-making center, is still maturing. Teens are more likely to take risks, positive and negative. You are still learning to gauge how to make decisions, prioritize one thing over another, and weigh the benefits with the possible consequences. So we're here to help you develop a system or a muscle or a skill, however you want to call it, to keep your excitements healthy. Your brain is craving learning at this age. Let's help your prefrontal cortex learn some new skills. So, going back to remember, feel, decide. We did the happy part where you remembered something healthy and natural that was good for you. You remembered the feeling and you decided whether you would want to pursue that again. Now let's try to remember a time when you did something that was not so healthy. Do you think you could put in the chat some decisions that you probably shouldn't have made? Maybe one too many candy bars or whatever it was. Just thinking about decisions that weren't so good in the long term. And remember how that felt? Was there a bad experience afterwards? Maybe a stomach ache, or maybe you sacrificed your sleep schedule and then you had a lousy day afterwards. or whatever it was. And then decide whether you want to make that decision again, and whether you would want to reinforce that positive experience that you had, maybe by going on a walk instead of going on social media, or hanging out with your dog instead of hanging out with someone who doesn't make you feel so good, or deciding to go and try roller skating or something instead of who knows, let's look in the chat for some other less positive experiences. I don't know if I'm sharing this whole thing. An extra glass of wine, too much food or sugar or carbs. Cell phone usage is a problem for everyone, not just for teens. Binge watching The Golden Bachelor. Texting while driving. Yeah, not a good idea. So using this skill set, you can think more about your decisions. And here we are, thinking about the ways that you can feel good naturally and doing a good thing for your brain and for your body and for your mind. And that's basically the end of the presentation. I hope you guys liked it. Sorry about all that delay. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Leo. That was so great. I loved the opportunity to reflect, and you did such a great job, even though we had some, tech glitches. You nailed it. So, well, thank you so much to both of our speakers. I don't know about you all. I think I learned a ton about not only the brain, trauma, cockroaches. Like, this was a great evening. So before we dive into Q&A, I have to plug our survey one more time in case you haven't already opened up that link. There are tons of amazing links happening in your chat right now. All sorts of resources. The survey link should be in there soon if it's not already. So please feel free to open that up and provide us with feedback when you get a chance. But I selfishly would love to kick off our Q&A just for both of our speakers, really. Both of you really offered an opportunity to reflect on our own experiences as adolescents. For some of us, it felt like it was a little further back. But I remember just from my own experience, there were moments where I really struggled to not only communicate with my parents, but also feel heard and seen with what was happening for me, what I was feeling. And so I'd love to just pose a question to both of you, Dr. Watson and Leo, of just what tips do you have in your roles as either a teen yourself or a psychologist or maybe a parent or just an adult working with teens? Like, what recommendations do you have for parents and teens to not only communicate effectively, but make the other feel heard and seen?
I can go. I think having patience and compassion and empathy are obviously like the main things, but also thinking outside of the box. Maybe if you have a hard time communicating with your kid face to face, then you can write a note or text or anything like that to just keep the line of communication flowing, and just little check-ins, maybe like a note if it's parents like leaving early for work, just saying like, I hope you have a good day, or I know that you were having a hard time yesterday, let me know if you want to talk, or just any ways. Thinking outside of the box is a great way to like keep communication open. And yeah, that's my tip.
Those are so great. I love the note tip, because I really think it's true. I think it's important for everyone, the adolescents and the caregivers or adults in their life, to get creative. I think at that phase of life, there's a couple things that we heard a lot regularly. One, one of the last slides I didn't share from the Richmond research that we did is what do young people need most? And I kid you not, half the responses of the 500 young people, the first response was either love and support or listening. And that's ironic because there's probably a lot of caregivers out there pulling their hair out, just being like, but I try to talk to them. They don't want to talk to me. And there's a bit of a contradiction there. But it's one we have to not just run away from, but kind of find our way through. Yes. Particularly if we are the main caregiver or parent, there is an important period of time in adolescence where they need to push away from us. Right? That's part of that biological mandate to learn how to do it with others. But that's where other adults can play a vital role. You know, if your adolescent is able to have other healthy adults in their life, whether it's through teachers or mentors, people they pick, other family members, near peers who are slightly older, those are all great people to have to trust and lean into. When we're a caregiver, they may not come to us directly. I think everything Leo just suggested, looking for kind of different ways to communicate, a lot of times it's really adolescence. There's so much growth happening. There's so much change taking place. It's not always easy to describe and put words to and explain to someone else. But at the same time, most of the young people said that if they didn't talk to adults, it's because they feared one of two things. Either they were going to share like something that they were going through, and the parent would be like, and I told you not to do that, and that now you're in trouble. You remember, this is why I told you not to do those things. Or, so they're ready to be judged and not listen to at first, or just simply not listened to, like not taken seriously. So I think even when our adolescents share with us things that maybe there's a repercussion or a consequence that as a caregiver we have to participate in framing, at least at first just try your absolute best to just stop and listen, be curious, be empathetic, and really try and hold kind of the frame of mind of what they're negotiating, and that they're doing their best to make decisions and helping them think through it, and really offering that kind of support, at least initially, it can be really helpful.
Thank you so much. We got a great question that actually is a good follow-up to this, I think, and just kind of zooming out, actually. And again, for both of you, what are some of the biggest, here we go. Okay. What are some of the biggest stresses that teens are facing in Marin right now? And then as parents, how can we help with this?
In my own opinions, I'm in the midst of finals right now, so I feel like there's definitely, Molly is too, so she's agreeing with me. There's definitely a lot of academic pressure in Marin. Just being there for your kid and supporting them. Yeah, it's a lot. Parents just like doing your best. I'm sure Dr. Watson will have a lot to say on this too, being a teacher. But we are definitely a rigorous county.
Yeah, I think I underscore everything that you said. I also think that thinking about Marin specifically, there's a lot of fractures socially, economically, racially within Marin County. And so there's very distinct experiences taking place. Sometimes out of sight from each other, and sometimes right within the same classrooms, relationships, friendships. So I think also a lot of young people, to whatever degree, are negotiating not only their personal experience of the world, either from their own particular traumas, marginalization, oppression, stressors, but also navigating being that young person amongst other young people navigating their own terms that might look very different. And so there's the possibility of feeling isolated, alienated, not alike those in your community. Because one thing we all know is basic human intelligence is that when we can have our suffering and our struggles at least shared with, that we are going through that with others, helps tremendously, whatever they are. And if we feel like we are alone in that, it makes everything 10 times as difficult. And already adolescents struggle with that feeling of feeling alone. So I think also having inviting, not just within our families, but also within our schools and communities, those opportunities for young people to express what their stresses are, and also to really listen to what the experiences of other young people in the community are that may be very, very different from our own, and take that seriously. I work in the canal, and young people who are coming into and living in the canal can have very, very different experiences than those who are in West Marin, and in some ways very similar, or in Mill Valley, or just across the county. It's a very diverse experientially county, and I think we have struggled as a county to create meaningful conversation and collaboration across those divides.
Thank you so much to both of you. Dr. Watson, in your response, you mentioned trauma, and we've had a couple really great questions related to trauma and relating to your teen. And so the first one I want to ask, I'm excited to ask all of them, is what would be the best way to encourage positive risk-taking when the environment itself might be traumatizing, and particularly when we're talking about race or gender?
Yeah, I think it's I don't want to in any way minimize how difficult that is, both for the young people themselves and for the adults who love them. I think it is, from what I've seen, and I'm talking as a white male doctor, but in my experiences working in Richmond and Oakland and around the Bay Area, I think it's vital to find safe spaces. And even if they have to be traveled to be a part of, it's absolutely crucial. Particularly for young people who are faced with not only growing themselves up as adolescents, but being confronted by white supremacy, being confronted by homophobia, discrimination for the languages that we speak, or the countries that we come from. So finding spaces where we feel safe, and that usually involves finding people who have experiences like us. But also, sometimes youths, like the Rise Center in Richmond was able to be that space for many young people. And I think there are lots of small and large efforts all over the county to create those kind of spaces for young people. And I think we really have to lean into them. And then lean into the relationships that we do have, like with the healthiest people we have in our lives, young or old, like doing everything we can possible to forge those relationships, because I think in the end that's helpful. And sometimes, particularly when dealing with a traumatizing environment, Leo, you pointed this out earlier, because the world is also traumatized. And I think actively participating in addressing those challenges, there's actually not been a lot, unfortunately, but the research that has been made out there that shows that even politicization or political involvement or becoming more conscious can really be a genuine buffer to some of the violence that young people have experienced. A lot of that research is more international. But we've seen that to be the case. So I think getting involved also, and saying, trying to create the world that you think is just and necessary. It activates us. We're no longer in that passive position, and we tend to meet people and we have something we can identify with and at least be proud of in ourselves when we're being told that who we are is not something worth being proud of. So I think for those kind of multiple reasons that can also really help. Leo, what do you think?
I just wanted to go off your point a little bit, and this is something that I've spoken to my dad about, and bring it back to remember, feel, decide. Instead of spending time spiraling about how awful our planet is doing, maybe go on a walk and go pick up some trash, um, buy a reusable straw or a water bottle, uh, just take like some mindfulness time and do what you can in your time and with your abilities to help our environment instead of using a lot of time and energy to worry. Um, that's a lifelong skill, but I believe that that could really help.
Thank you both. I love those. I think just to echo what you both said, I think connection and small actions wherever you can take them in safe spaces are really important. I see that you unmuted Dr. Watson in case you wanted to continue speaking to that. Oh, okay. I had actually one other question, and this was also related to trauma, but this was more from a parent perspective. And I think this is a really interesting question. It may be a really big one, but maybe we can just, maybe Dr. Watson, you can briefly speak to it. What are some ways that maybe you can parent a teen when the parent themselves has experienced trauma as a teen? It's easy and probably just natural to get triggered or activated in those moments, and really wanting to like protect your child in that moment as well. So just curious if you have any thoughts or recommendations to, in those moments, how to take care of yourself as the parent and support the teen at the same time.
Yeah, it's a great question. I will start with the extremely important caveat that I am not the parent of a teenager. I have a 5-year-old, so I have in some ways no idea what's coming down the line. But I have worked with a lot of parents and a lot of adolescents, and and have done a lot of trauma healing within families as well. And I think that it's one of our most fundamental jobs as a parent to take what we have learned from our experience and use it to guide us in helping raise and protect our children. So when we've experienced a lot of hurt in certain ways, of course, not only are we going to be sensitive to, or maybe reactive to, but just very appreciative of, hey, that kind of violence is real in this world. And I think what I see a lot of parents who've had a lot of trauma, how they interact with their young person, kind of how I interpret their intent is like, that violence is real. It's in my bones. I wish it wasn't. And I want to make sure that doesn't get into your bones. Right. And that's beautiful. That is beautiful. And we kind of hold our own value in what our own healing is. So do our own healing, offer that wisdom and insight from our very real lived experience to our young people, and try to leave that space for the reality that this is what I have to offer you, but you are you in your world now that is different from mine, and can take what you can from this, and will also be kind of communicating back what your experience is and what you need. So I think finding any way possible to keep the lines of communication open. I said this once, and this sounds kind of parent shaming. I don't mean it to be at all, but it really just struck me when I I remember young people saying to me, or rather, let me phrase it differently. I have never I've been working with adolescents for 20 years. I've never had a young person say, my caregivers just listen to me too much. So that I don't mean that like we're not all listening good enough, everyone's doing their best, but the reality is, I think providing spaces to just really hear and try not to judge. We can offer back what we need to, and when we need to step in, we feel the need. That's part of our job, but always keeping in mind, where can we listen, and where can we kind of allow young people to make mistakes, to take risks, within a range that we really are, staying up all night hoping that it's not hurting them, what they're doing.
Thank you both so much. I mean, I loved that advice, and that sentiment about you can't listen too much. I think that just kind of echoes throughout life. I'm monitoring our time. We are coming down to the home stretch, but I also wanted to end, like, that was wonderful. I want to end on like a really hopeful note as well. We talked a lot about the superpower of teens and adolescents. And so just really fast before we're wrapping up, I wanted to ask both of you, like, what are you hopeful for in terms of either working with teens, or Leo being a teen? Like, what gives you hope?
Short term, I'm hopeful for winter break and to not be doing finals anymore. I'm also hopeful for getting through this and getting into college and being able to open up into like the rest of my life. And getting to work with the MHIT board more. You guys are like superstars. Those are my like short term and long terms.
I working with young people does keep me hopeful. I have to say, seeing so many adults here today wanting to talk about adolescence is wonderful. I really mean it. I really hope you give yourselves a pat on the back or a hug, because we need much more intergenerational conversation and listening. I believe it's something we've lost with our social structures, and I think we need to find it again. So everyone, that gives me a lot of hope. But let's all take hope from young people's creativity, innovation. I mean, I've worked with young people who, so many young people who've experienced so much pain and difficulty, and expressed tremendous amounts of hopelessness, and yet find it in themselves to still say, and yet something better is possible. We have to fight for something more. We have to make this different. I don't have any hope it's going to happen. I had so many young people in that survey we did, 500 young people, start by saying, what's the point of telling you, answering these questions when we know nothing's going to change, and then spend 2 hours talking to us? So that's an inherent, almost biologically driven, like, I don't believe it's going to change, but some part of me is still insisting on doing my part in case that it does. And I think we're going to depend on that to survive. And it's beautiful that that's still thriving in our young people, and hopefully in us old people too.
I hope so too. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you. This was just wonderful. Thank you to everyone who stayed on. I appreciate you giving me 2 extra minutes. Thank you all for being here. Linda read my mind. That is our survey link to let us know like how this was, give us feedback so that we can make it exactly what you need moving forward. And thank you so much for being here. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season filled with hope and joy, and we'll see you at our next discussion.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.